Greetings and welcome. We are in Junior English. And our objective now this hour is to introduce ourselves to the great American poet, and you want to underline the word great here, the great American poet Robert Frost. Now, Frost is going to be part of a movement in poetics and poetical history that we call modernism. I'm with you on page 894, 895. Modernism. Now, it's always problematic to use this word modern, because in 1350, guess what? Those writers called themselves moderns. The reason is simple. They were a whole lot different from 200 years earlier. Do you get my drift? We use this word modern always to talk about something that's new. Of course, every epoch has its new movements, right? It becomes problematic to then ask the question, if roughly the time period we're talking about here in the 1940s, 1950s was modern, then what do you call the time period you were born in? And the answer is postmodern. Postmodern was when I was born, so what will the time period be when my kids are born, you might ask? And the answer, postmodern? No kidding, we're already using that phrase, postmodern. Are we going to go 3 posts into modern? You see what I'm saying? Here's always the problem with naming these epochs. And yet, having said that, scholars really do talk about modernity in a certain and prescribed way. Yes, it is new, but we want to get these elements of modernity, these features of modernism in our notes. They're with you right there on 894. Don't be shocked if on our exam we ask you to be familiar with these characteristics as they relate to some of the poems we'll be studying, especially the poetry of Frost. So take a look at it real quickly on 894. Notice that modernists rejected, you might want to be making sure you have these in your notes, modernists rejected notions of traditional subject matter and themes. So for example, instead of topics like love, for example, you're going to write about a lack of love, inability to commit, for example, as your textbook says, to love. Or the inability, this is a huge one, to even be able to communicate what you feel. All right? Modernists as well are always going to rely on the fact that nothing lasts, as your first bullet point says there, and therefore themes frequently focused on impermanence. This is a huge one, write it down. Impermanence and change. By the way, I'll tell you in advance, at the end of this lecture, I'm going to look at your annotations to see how well you flowed this lecture. I will be assigning negative points on the test sheet for those who are not flowing this lecture right now. You should be working in class notes right now, which means you ought to have annotations right out now in front of you, and you ought to be working with those annotations. That will help you as well to stay alert and focused during my presentation. For those of you who didn't have any annotations, obviously you're creating them as we go. So again, I'm on page 894, I'm on the first bullet point, and I'm making the observation that modernists are very much about change. Things are not what they used to be. We're not going to look at, for example, the old traditional topics of love, for example, in the same way. Look at the second bullet point. We're no longer interested necessarily in heroes. Some of the values of society that used to be considered as important. I'm on the second bullet point at the bottom of 894. By the way, for those of you who already did these annotations, you should be working in a different colored ink. And you should be identifying then this work as already written down by you, as probably you did when you took these notes, right? For example, these modern writers, and now we're ready to this word that Mr. Hunter and I were talking about yesterday, they are alienated. Now wait a minute, there's that word right there on 894. Do you see it? It's spelled for you and everything. Second to the last line, third to the last line there on 894. Alienated. What does it mean to say a person is alienated? Does anyone know what that means? Separated from the group. That is huge. These writers of the modern period, this is a big, put a star next to this one. These writers all are interested in the fact that so many people are alienated from the rest of humanity. Let's say it this way, they don't feel like they fit in. Let's make a 3B observation real quickly. There are some students at Worland High School that totally love this place. Man, they totally love it. Like, they're totally into it. They love to be a part of it. They get up every morning and they go, yes, I get to come to Worland High School where I get to be a part of my friends group, etc., etc. But there are other students who wake up in the morning and they loathe this place. There isn't anything about this place that they like at all. And the reason is simple. They don't feel like they fit in. There are no groups here that they identify with. There's no reason for them to be here, and yet they still show up. But when they're here, they will report often that they feel like a ghost in this place, like a phantom. They are alienated. These poets are going to very much emphasize that alienation. All right, the third bullet point is on 895 up at the top of the page. These poets are going to engage in a lot of irony. That is to say, they're going to talk in doublespeak a lot of times. They're going to undersay or oversay things. They no longer are so confident in the eternal truths. And because that's the case, they often will speak ironically. In other words, this is an easy way for us to ask it. What's ironic about some of Frost's major poetic offerings? For example, his poem Out, Out. What is ironic about that poem? That's going to be a question we will want to address. Finally, rather than directly stating meaning, modernists will typically use, this is a huge word, you want to write it down. It's right there on page 895. Often they will use symbols and images. All right? Symbols, S-Y-M-B-O-L-S. Symbols and images. So we will often see this in our study of these poems. We will look to see what kinds of symbolic types of events are happening, transpiring in the poem. All right? For example, do you see this bullet point? The speaker in Frost's Acquainted with the Night, one or two of you saying to me yesterday, I don't quite get it. It's a stupid poem about a guy that walks at night. Really? Seriously? Take a look at what your book says. Never admits that the speaker is lonely or sad. But the images simply show that the speaker is lonely or sad. This is a hallmark of modernist poetry. All right? Now, with that in mind, go ahead and turn over to the work of Frost. I'm going to start on 896. You can see his dates there. Notice, he's actually born in the 19th century. He lives through a huge part of the 20th century, dying, of course, in 63. I want to make a couple of observations about Frost right away, and some of you will remember Frost from maybe last year as sophomores or even as freshmen when we read one of his poems. As freshmen, I think some of you were introduced to the road less traveled, two roads diverted in a path. I took the one less traveled by, and that's made all the difference. Some of you maybe remember that poem. Others you will maybe remember in your sophomore year, The Offerings of Birches, a poem about a young kid that jumps from trees and hangs onto the branches. Or that famous poem called Mending Wall, about two guys that walk down a fence line putting the stones back into the wall to fix the wall, of course, symbolic. Let's say a couple of things about Frost real quickly. Frost is not of the city. He's of the country. He was raised in New England, in the country. He is of the country, but he knows the city. So Frost's poems will be both oftentimes portrayals of both country life as well as city life. Both. Okay? 2. Frost, and for those of you, two roads diverged in a path, and I took the one less traveled by, and that's made all the difference. You'll appreciate this totally. Frost begins with very simple word pictures, but then moves to more complex symbolic understandings. That poem about two roads diverged in a yellow wood is about two paths in the middle of the woods. But really, Hunter, it's not about two paths in the middle of the woods. What's it about? Do you remember that poem? I took the road less traveled by, and that's made all the difference. It's a poem that talks about nonconformity. Not taking the road everybody else takes. That is to say, not making the decisions everyone else makes. That poem's got nothing to do with being in the woods, walking down one road that forks, right? That's not what really that poem is about. That poem is about making decisions. Make the decision to be your own person, to go your own way. By the way, what writer that we've studied would have agreed with that? And he said, to be great is to be misunderstood. You're right. Ralph Waldo Emerson. Well done. That's right. Emerson loved that nonconformity idea, as did Frost as well. Let's take a look now at the Modernist offering, Acquainted with the Night, on 898. So we're going to start there. Open your hymnals there. You ought to have annotations now out for that one. Frost is very much he can be very much a classical poet. So, for example, notice that this poem is nicely balanced when you look at it on the page. First stanza, 3 lines. Second stanza, 3 lines. Third stanza, 3 lines. Do you see it? Fourth stanza, 3 lines with a final couplet. Correct? Wait a minute. How many lines is that then? No, I mean total lines. How many total lines in this poem? Count them up real quick. 14 lines. Wait a minute. When a poem has 14 lines, we call it a what? Right? It's called a sonnet normally, correct? So here you have Frost playing with very conservative, traditional kinds of forms of poetry, and yet at the same time, he's going to play a very modernist game. Now, if we're not paying close attention, we'll simply see this as a poem about a stupid guy that walks at night. But we have to understand, Frost again works from the simple to the complex. Let's take a look at it. I have been one, acquainted with the night. What does acquainted mean? You know it well. You know it well. This is a poem about a guy who likes to walk at night all alone. I've been one acquainted with the night. I've walked out in rain and back in rain. I've outwalked the farthest city light. I've looked down the saddest city lane. I've passed by the watchman on his beat and dropped my eyes, unwilling to explain. I've stood still and stopped the sound of feet when far away an interrupted cry came over houses from another street, but not to call me back or say goodbye. And further still, at an unearthly height, one luminary clock against the sky proclaimed the time was neither wrong nor right. I've been one acquainted with the night. Now, as your textbook pointed out a few moments ago, this poem is not going to come right out and say that this individual is alienated. We will infer that from what lines? Write it down. What are the ideas in this poem that suggest this cat's pretty lonely? By the way, Bernard, do you make a difference between being alone and being lonely? Stephen, do you make a distinction between being alone and being lonely? Jot down in your notes, what's the difference between those two? What's the difference between being alone and being lonely? I've had students that say, I can be in the middle of a group of people and still be lonely. Some people would say, how is that possible? Dude, you got all these people around you. How can you be lonely? Well, there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. In this poem, is this guy alone or is he lonely? Jot down in your notes what you think. Notice he likes to walk out even in the rain. He'll not let weather determine when he goes for walks. Notice he tells us that he's walked so far that he walks out beyond the city and then back again. Notice the adjectives. Second stanza. He's walked down saddest city lane. See, some of you will be jotting these down as observations in regards to alienation. He's passed by the watchman on his beat and dropped his eyes, unwilling to explain. Why do you think he doesn't look? Why do you think he doesn't look at the cop, the night watchman, when he walks? Like, if you're the cop and I'm this guy, when I come near you, I do this. I look down. Walk past you and then look up. Why look down? Why? He doesn't want to talk to anyone. Good, let's write it down. He doesn't want to talk to anybody. He's not interested in having conversations. Do you know students like this? Maybe you are one. Some days you arrive at school and you just don't want to talk to anyone. You would prefer to go through most of your morning, for example, without even making eye contact with anyone. Now, there's some of us who see those students and say, what is wrong with those poor students? They need to have a conversation. I'm going to make it my project to have them have a conversation. Others of us will say, no, I totally get it. Sometimes I just want to be alone. Even if I'm in the middle of a bunch of people, I don't want to be bugged. Notice the next one. I've stood still and stopped the sound of feet when far away an interrupted cry came over houses from another street, but not to call me back or say goodbye. What's the point here? Jot down in your notes what he's saying. Nobody seems to care about where he goes and what he does. No one seems to know if he's gone or if he's not gone. No one's calling him back. There's one luminary clock against the sky that will proclaim time is neither wrong nor right. And then the opening line again, acquainted with the night. 3B observation, just jot down real quickly. Are you a walker? Do you like it? See, some of us like to walk, others of us don't. And are you a person that enjoys walking at night? Do I have any of those people in here that like to go for long walks at night? I have some students that say, I do not like walking at night. It kind of freaks me out. When it gets dark, I'm not interested in going for these walks out in the dark. Other students will report, dude, that is the best time to go for walks. When it's dark outside, it's nighttime. Some of us like it. Jot down why you either like it or you don't like it at 3B real quickly. Again, I'll be checking to see that this work is done for you here in a little bit. Do you have any interest in going on walks at nighttime? Why or why not? And of course there's this question of rain as well, right? Do you like walking in the rain?
Would it be similar if it was so early in the morning?
Yeah, you could call it early morning. Yeah, you can. Sure. Because that's the same gig, right? Where the sun's not up yet and stuff. Some of us like the dark. Others of us do not like the dark. How about the rain? How about the rain? Some of us like walking in the rain. Others of us do not. We don't like getting wet. We don't enjoy it. Some of us who are athletes who perform outside in the rain like it. Others hate it. What do you think is the difference? Jot down in your notes. Why is it some people love it, other people hate it? Some will say, I'm great with being outside in rain as long as it's not cold. If it's really cold, I hate it. If it's warm rain, I love it. But, some of us say, I hate being all wet. I don't like that. It's nasty. All right, let's take a look at Nothing Gold Can Stay. I'm on page 900 now. Now, hello. Now, again, I want to come back. I want to draw you back to this simple observation. Frost moves from the simple to the complex. You're going to see this immediately in this little poem. Are you ready for this? This is a poem about a leaf. L-E-A-F. Of course, think about it. Ruthie's tree outside, when we sat together in September, that tree was covered in leaves. They were all green. Then sometime around October, November, they started to turn red, then brown, and golden brown, and now what? Gone. Now, of course, a child would say about that tree, it's dead. It's gone. Let's just cut it down. You as an adult would say, no, you don't understand. That tree isn't dead. What do you mean it's not dead? No, here in a few weeks, we'll actually start to see Ruthie's tree again begin to produce leaves that will become green. That next year when your seniors will become brown. And if that notion of the cyclical nature of nature is foundational to this little 8-line poem. Let's take a look at it. Nature's first green is gold. Her hardest hue to hold. Her early leaf's a flower, but only so an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf. So Eden sank to grief. So dawn goes down to day. Nothing gold can stay. Now, jot down right away, this is a poem that's playing the game of an extended metaphor. What do I mean by that metaphor? What does that even mean? One thing represents something else. A represents B. What is the A in this poem? A leaf. Not just any leaf, but a leaf that does what? Turns gold and then falls off the tree. Why does it fall off the tree?
Because it's dead.
It's dead. It's dead.
The tree
But what's the bee? Hernandez is already taking us to what the metaphor implies. What is the point of this little poem? Nothing gold can stay means what? Nothing lasts forever. Nothing lasts forever. You don't get to be a junior forever. Sooner or later, you gotta leave your junior year. No matter what we want to hold on to, right? Whatever that is. You can't hold on to anything. Why not? Why can't you hold on to stuff?
Because things change.
Everything changes, doesn't it? You haven't met any 200-year-old people for a reason. They don't exist. Why not? Because everything, as the poem says, everything that's gold has to go. Everything changes. Everything goes on. Notice how this poem starts out with the word nature. Nature's first green is gold. Her hardest hue, color, to hold. We look at those trees when they have that golden color in the fall. We would wish that they could last longer. They don't last longer. It doesn't take but a few days, right? The wind comes along, blows the leaves away, and off they all go. A word picture, metaphor, for what it means to be in nature. That is to say, to be alive, right? Notice again, very simple little poem with an interesting message behind it. Jot down at 3B, when was the last time that you tried to hold on to something or you were sad about the passing of something that now looking back you had to admit probably had to run its course? Might have been a relationship. Might have been somebody that you loved deeply in your family who had to pass on. It might have been something that you created that you were really proud of. It might have been a sports season that you were pleased got over or didn't get over. You were sad that it did get over. It might have been something that you purchased, a garment, some kind of vehicle or something, right? Any number of possibilities like that. Okay?
Even materials that we don't think about because they don't in our time. They don't last forever.
This school building someday will not exist anymore. Right? Right? Sooner or later, it's going to wear out, huh? All right, let's go to our third and final poem, out on page 901. Of all three of our offerings by Frost, this is maybe the most controversial of the three, for reasons we'll point out in a moment. Okay? The poem makes no sense if you don't understand a couple of things. If you do, this poem makes all the sense in the world. Okay? In New England, you have billions of trees. You got to know this, because you live in a desert where there are very few trees. I do mean so many trees that from the air you can't see the ground, and from the ground you can't see the sky in certain parts of New England. All right? Because that's the case, these trees are going to be cut down and used for lumber. But the problem is that you're talking about huge trees. So they cut the tree down, but then they have to turn it into usable lumber. The way they would do that is out in the mountains. They would bring the wood in, and then they would put it on a table that had a big saw blade that spun. Some of you are maybe familiar with this idea. It's a big blade with sharp teeth. And what you would do is there was a belt that ran that thing, made it spin. And then you would take wood and you would push the wood against the blade. The blade would then split the wood. Very dangerous work. Why? Several reasons. The blade could catch the wood, hit knots in the wood, and believe it or not, would kick the wood right back. So, for example, if you didn't stand to the side and work the wood, but you stood right behind it, happened all the time. That blade would catch the wood, send it right back, send it right through the individual. Put a hole right through the middle of them, because the velocity could send it back. Immediately, you could die. Of course, the other is more tragic. The wood would catch by the blade and would then go through very quickly. So if you were not paying attention and you were holding the wood, feeding, and then all of a sudden it caught it, very quickly it could take off a body part, usually a hand or an arm. Happened all the time. And of course, once that happens, there ain't much you're gonna be able to do. Our poem, secondly, for your notes, is set in the mountains. There's no city close by. So that what we're saying is that the individuals who live and work and lumber out in this region, they have no ability to get some kind of hospital care if something bad happens. Got me? Third and final observation before we read. And this one will sound familiar to some of us that grew up around farms or whatever. Children did lots of the labor in these lumber types of farms. Kids, from the time they were really young. I mean, I've had students who say, dude, at 7, I was already driving a tractor or a truck for my grandpa on the farm. You know, okay, so that kind of thing still happens for us. The same will be a part of our story here. This is a little story that translates into a narrative poem, and we're going to see it as 2 poems. Write that down in your notes. We're going to see it as 2 poems, actually. All right? Let's begin. Out. The buzz saw snarled and rattled in the yard and made dust and dropped stove-length sticks of wood. Sweet-scented stuff when the breeze drew across it. And from there, those that lifted eyes could count 5 mountain ranges, one behind the other, under the sunset, far into Vermont. And the saw snarled, rattled, snarled, and rattled as it ran light or had to bear a load, and nothing happened. Day was all but done. Call it a day. I wish they might have said to please the boy by giving him the half hour that a boy counts so much when saved from work. His sister stood beside them in her apron to tell them, supper. At the word, the saw, as if to prove saws knew what support meant, leaped out at the boy's hand, or seemed to leap. He must have given the hand. However it was, neither refused the meeting, but the hand. The boy's first outcry was a rueful laugh as he swung toward them, holding up the hand, half in appeal, but half as to keep the life from spilling. Then the boy saw all. Since he was old enough to know, big boy doing a man's work, though a child at heart, he saw all spoiled. Don't let him cut my hand off. The doctor, when he comes, don't let him, sister. So, but the hand was gone already. The doctor put him in the dark of ether. He lay and puffed his lips out with his breath. And then the watcher at his pulse took fright. No one believed. They listened at his heart. Little, less, nothing. And that ended it. No more to build on there. And they, since they were not the one dead, turned to their affairs. Now let's work here for a few moments with this poem. Many have argued that this is 2 poems, not 1. The first poem is a simple narrative. It's Frost's genius way of simply telling a very brief story about a little boy who works out in the yard with this large saw. And at the very end of the day, at the end of a long, hard day of work, his sister comes to the front porch and says to him, it's supper time. To which, in the moment that he hears it's supper time, he must have lost his concentration. The hand goes in front of the blade. Hand is gone. And in that moment, we're told he realizes that everything is gone. Of course, immediately he doesn't understand that he's going to die. Why would a young boy who grew up on a farm recognize the loss of a hand as a big dog deal? You're right. He's not going to be able to work the way his daddy would have been able to work once you lose your hand. So immediately his first concern, notice as a young boy, is, I'm not going to be able to work anymore. But then it comes to him secondly. Don't let him take my hand, but the hand's already gone. And then we're told that he's put in the dark of ether. What does that mean? Painkiller. You got it. Painkiller. He's in tremendous pain. Notice how Frost will give us the pulse. Brilliant, right? Using the dash. Little, less, nothing. And that ended it. It's over. No more to build on there means what?
So life is over.
A father's farm was made possible by the children that he bore, especially his sons. His sons were who he handed the farm over to. No more to build on there will mean what?
He can't.
It's over. That boy's gone. He's dead, right? No more to build on there. But the second poem, or the final line and a half of the poem, and this is where Frost becomes a modernist poet. And they, since they were not the one dead, turned to their affairs. Wait a minute. Literally, what does that mean?
It went on.
You got all these people standing around the bed watching this kid. His pulse goes less, less, and then he's dead. And then what do all those people do? They do this. Oh well. And they all leave. Now that's what the poem says. That's what happened. But we read this poem as a modernist offering of alienation. What does this poem seem to suggest about our capacity to feel others' pain? Now, any athlete who's ever been injured knows this all too well, right? The knee goes out, everyone's a little bit interested for a little bit, and then it's a long, long, lonely road to rehabilitation where nobody seems to care anymore. Every once in a while, somebody might ask, and the athlete can easily be forgotten as the season moves on and as the athlete has to go through rehabilitation alone. This poem seems to suggest really interesting observation. As humans, we seem to struggle to identify with other people's pain. The only pain that seems to matter is the pain that what? Is our own. We don't have a tendency to pay very close attention to other people's pain. And they, since they were not the one dead, turned to their affairs.
But in this one is referring to life, it's referring